How's it going, my Comic Chat Army? We're here today with Scott Sackett, the artist of
artist and co-creator.
Oh, all right, co-creator of Heaven's Reject.
The difference is if you're on a comic project, you're the artist and you're the co-creator. That means you didn't get a page rate, but you get paid on the back end.
Oh, nice! I never knew that.
Well, I mean, it's not technical, but if you look into it, because if you're the co-creator, you're entitled to something. But if you come in, if it's a deal where they say, well, we'll give you, $100 a page, then technically you don't get a royalty. I mean, everybody's deal's different, but that's kind of the distinction, at least in my mind. I could be wrong though. So. And
are you open for consultations? Like if people need art? Are you available?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been done with my part of Heaven's Rejects since early. Well, I did the lettering also, and I finished up the lettering like a couple months ago. And I've been casting about for things to do. And I haven't really found anything. And I've been bugging Greg, Greg Wright is the writer for Heaven's Rejects. And Greg is a great guy, but he's also very busy. Like me, he has a day job. And so getting him, I think we're going to kind of wait and see how Heaven's Rejects does. Of course, my hope is that it will do great and there'll be enough interest to warrant doing a second arc. The first arc is 4 issues. It's going to be in the I think the June or July solicitations. So I guess what's that mean? It comes out in September or something like that. And I keep telling Greg we need to go to San Diego and get a big banner and we can have like a hotel suite and have a big party and invite like I don't know who you invite to these big parties. Greg is telling me that's fine if I bankroll it. I tell him I'll go half if he will, but he hadn't committed yet. So no, but I don't know what I'm hoping that we get to do something to promote the book, but I don't know exactly since it's not in solicitations yet. I don't know exactly where it's at on there. But yeah, I mean, so I'm basically just footloose and fancy free. I've been working on a little project of my own that I'm calling 1976. It's basically, I grew up basically in the 70s. I started reading comics, and when I was a kid, I had 2 uncles that were older than me, and the closest to me was about 5 years older than me, and he would get comics. He wasn't a big comics fan, but he'd get comics. And my grandma would go to garage sales, and so we get all these, just an odd assortment of comics. Mm-hmm. And so I'd go to my grandma's house, and I'd go, read my uncle's comics, and it might be like an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 or something like, an issue of Avengers or something. And there was something about, and especially the way the comics were written and the way the storytelling was back then, you would pick up this random comic and you could kind of tell what was going on, but you got a glimpse of like a bigger world. And that's what I want to do in my 1976. I don't have a publisher for it. It's going to be like 1 issue, and it's going to be like if you got a random comic from 1976, and I'm going to kind of work in the Bronze Age style. But that's my own thing. I haven't got very far in that, but that's what I've been working on lately. But yeah, certainly if somebody out there has a project that they're just dying to hire me for, dying to reach out to me for, I'm absolutely open to something like that.
How can I get a hold of you?
The easiest way to get hold of me is probably through my website. It's scottsackett.org. That's SCOTTSACKETT.org. There's a golfer named Scott Sackett. He has scottsackett.com. I got .org. I'm also on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. There's quite a few Scott Sacketts. But I mean, this is what I look like, and this is what my profile looks like. And I'm on Instagram, and I think I'm Scott Sackett on Instagram. I have a Twitter, but I don't really do Twitter that much just because it's a black hole every time I go into it. So some people love it. I'm not I post on Instagram occasionally. I'll post a lot of art, and I do a few things on Facebook, but I'm really not a big social media guy. But yeah, if someone wants to read it, absolutely, they can friend me on Facebook and follow me on Instagram or shoot me a message. My email is Scott D. Sackett. My middle name is David. Scott D. Sackett @gmail.com. Somebody reach out to me or whatever. But
where can we get upcoming news about your new book or any book?
Probably Instagram or Facebook would be the easiest way to get information from me. Like I said, I have a website. My website is a great place. It has links to all that. It's also a great place to see my art.
All right.
That's kind of, and I have some pages from Heaven's Rejects there that people can see.
All right. What other books have you done? You just only done the 2?
Oh gosh. Let me give you my history. So I grew up in a very artistic household. I mentioned my grandmother, my grandparents, my grandmother, my father's stepmother. She grew up in New York City, and she was an interior decorator. And so she moved to Oklahoma. She never lost her accent, which is funny because this was in a little suburb of Oklahoma City. So she had this very thick New York accent, and she would talk to me. Nobody could understand her. Sometimes even like her own family couldn't understand her. But she was an interior decorator in New York City. And then when she moved to Oklahoma, she made, now this is going to sound weird now, but back in the 70s, there was people would hire somebody to come in their house and make draperies or curtains. Now you just go to Lowe's or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the time, and in the 70s, Oklahoma, there was a big oil boom going on. And so there were a lot of these real expensive houses being built. And she would go into these really expensive houses and make custom draperies. And so I grew up around my grandmother doing that. I remember when I was a kid, I would see her, and she had a big table that she worked on, and she would be talking on the phone, like doing orders for fabric or talking to customers or whatever. And she always doodled, and drew this stuff. In fact, when I got older and got interested in comics, she actually took like a figure drawing class with me at the local Votech. There was a figure drawing class, and the first time I tried to take it, it got canceled because there were enough people. And she told me, she goes, "Oh, Scotty, I'll take it with you." And so, and she passed away, unfortunately, a few years after that. And so I always remember that time where I would go by and pick her up, and we'd go to the figure drawing class together. It wasn't a nude model; it was a clothes model. That might have been awkward, but my grandma was cool. And so my grandma did that. My grandfather was a musician; he'd been a drummer for years. My uncle I remember did painting. I have a cousin, my cousin Mario. He when I was a kid, and this is kind of how I got started drawing. When I was a kid, he was going down to the University of Oklahoma getting a degree in fine art. So I was probably about 10, 12, something like that. And he was in school down there, and he helped my grandmother make draperies. And so he'd come up, and him and I talked. And I was really into fantasy books at the time. And so we talked about Lord of the Rings and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Conan and that sort of thing. He's the one that got me into Dungeons and Dragons. And so he would come up, and I'd see him working on stuff, drawing. He'd work on homework, drawing home. We did all these drawings. And he's the one that showed me how perspective worked when I was a little kid. And so like in 7th or 8th grade art, we went in, and the teacher's like, "Okay, here's how perspective works." And they do the thing they do like telephone poles, and it's to show you like how it converges and stuff. And she showed us that, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I get it." And I immediately got, the horizon and all that stuff. But I wasn't really into comics as a little kid. I was more into fantasy and stuff. And then when I got a little bit older, my parents had a family friend. The family, they lived in Georgia. They moved around a lot. And an older son who was in the Army, and he was in Germany, and he'd gone to the World Science Fiction Convention. He was really into science fiction. So him and I kind of got along, because I was too as a kid. Oh, and still am. And he came to my parents' house, and they were there, and I don't know why. He must have been back on leave or something, because the whole family stayed with my parents. And so we were there, and so him and I were talking, and he was telling me about the X-Men, and I never knew anything about the X-Men. I'd read some Fantastic Four. I had a copy of like issue 1, like 86 or something, that I carried around me forever. Again, it was that one issue that I just devoured, because there was so much into it. Mm-hmm. And I just, there was this big world that I wanted to explore through this one issue. But anyway, he was telling me about the X-Men. He's, oh yeah, they're on this planet, and there's the Macaron crystal, and the Phoenix comes and saves them. It's like 113, 112, 113, something like that. The very first of John Byrne's run on the X-Men. And so he told me about this. Well, then later I had a friend who he collected X-Men, and my father worked for he's in the National Guard, and they had an open house they would have on Sundays. And this kid went to my church, and so at the open house, you go out. They had these big in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma National Guard did the big cargo planes, with the big. They had the opening in the back with the ramp that comes down, and so you go see him. So his name was Jeff, and I was like, oh Jeff, and he would come over to my house because he lived a little ways away. So he would stay at my house like on Sunday afternoons, and then we'd go to church Sunday night and get handed off to the respective parents. We did that a lot, and one day he brought X-Men, and I'm going to blank on the number, but it's the first one where they fight Arcade, maybe 123, something like that. And I remember reading that, and it showed they were in New York, and they went to Lincoln Center, and they got gassed by Arcade, and they got carried off in a box. And I was just like, this is amazing. And so at that point, I became like an X-Men junkie. And I used to mow lawns when I was a kid. I never got an allowance. My parents were too cheap to give me money for doing nothing. But I would mow yards, and I was probably maybe 12, 13, something like that. And I'd mow yards all summer. My parents would help me. Like their friends would get me yards. So I did 5 yards every week, and I got $20 a yard. And I had to mow. My dad made me mow our yard and not get paid. And there was a widow lady that went to our church. I had to mow her yard and not get paid. And usually I did one or the other. And it was my way of paying for the gas and that sort of thing. But anyway, so I would subscribe to these comics, and you could get, at the time you would get 3 and you get a 4th one for free. And it was always Fantastic Four, Avengers, X-Men. And then there was a 4th one that I never could figure out. One year John Byrne did like 2 issues of Indiana Jones, and so I got the Indiana Jones, and he only did the first 2 issues, and there was other people. I thought the art was terrible from then on. I loved the movie and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The comic book I couldn't get into as a kid. But anyway, that's kind of how I got into comics as a kid. When I turned like 16, I got a job, I got a car, I put comic books off to the gas was expensive when I was a kid, so I put comics off to the side. Didn't have money for them. Didn't get back into comics until I went to art school. I originally was an architecture major in college. Decided that the math was just too much. Didn't want to do all that math, and there's a whole story for that. But anyway, met my wife, got married. At the time there was a place here that it was kind of a trade school, but they had the program was called commercial art, which was I was trained to do like back in the old days is like you would see like a newspaper and it had like ads in it, and people do like spot illustrations, and they'd lay out all that stuff by hand before computers or desktop publishing or anything, and that's kind of what I was trained to do. And I graduated from high school in 1985. I graduated from art school in 1989. When I was in art school, one of the guys at the school there, one of my instructors, was also the manager of a comic shop. And so he had this is a crazy story. He had a watch that looked like I don't know if you remember the old Swatch watches, the plastic watches with the crazy colors.
Yeah.
I don't know how that may be before your time, but anyway, he had this watch, and I was like, "Is that a Swatch watch?" Because I was really into Swatch watch. What is that? That's really cool. And a smiley face. I had this weird red thing. I was like, "What is that?" And it was a promo watch he got for the comic Watchmen. And so he told me, "Oh, it's for this comic book." And so I bought. And at this point, it had been collected into a trade. And I mean, when we first got married, we were very, very poor, but I did get an allowance for my wife. And so I saved up my money, and I bought a copy of Watchmen, and I devoured it like somebody studying like the Torah or something. I just devoured it, and I was hooked again. And then when I got out, I got a job, and so then and this was like in the early 90s, and then the Batman movie came along, and out of the Batman movie, I had the Dark Knight. Everybody said, "Oh, it's like the Dark Knight Returns," and so I picked up that trade. I did have one trade. Hang on, I got to show you this. I keep this on my drawing table. So all the time I was poor, I bought this at a used bookstore probably right before I got married, and I carried this. I don't know if you can see this. Where's the camera? The corners are rounded off on this thing because I carried it in my bag all through art school. This is for anybody that doesn't know what this. This is the Dark Phoenix Saga. It's the first trade that they did of it, and I carried this. I'm a huge John Byrne fan, by the way. But so this one, I don't carry this in my bag anymore, but I did up until this. So I got it signed by John Byrne and Chris Claremont at New York Comic Con a few years ago. And so it just stays on my desk just so I can absorb some of that energy, because I consider that like that arc and that era of comics kind of the peak, and that really influenced my art in a lot of ways. Like I said, I'm a huge John Byrne fan. Still am. A lot of people dog him, but he's doing great stuff on his website right now. Did I answer your question? Oh no, you asked what comics I did.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got off on a tangent, man. If you need me, raise your hand if you want to talk, okay, Cody?
No,
anyway, so what happened was I was into, like in the 90s, I was into comics, but it never entered my brain about making them. I was an artist, but as a kid, I'd wanted to go to the Kubert School. I'd sent off a brochure, but it's New York. I'd never been to New York. I grew up in a little suburb outside Oklahoma City, and the idea of going to college in New York just seemed super intimidating. Even though my grandmother was from New York, I had relatives that live in New York. I could have, had I really pursued it, I probably could have done it, but probably wouldn't have met my wife, so I'm better off certainly. But it never entered. Back then it was like it's crazy. My favorite comic book artist lived in Canada, but in my brain I thought, you have to live in New York City if you want to make comics. I don't know what I was thinking. And I knew he lived in Canada. Anyway, it just didn't seem like it was something that normal people did. And so when my wife went back to school in the 90s, I was a big comic fan. She went back to school. My wife is an electrical engineer, and so she went back to school. And so I got to thinking, like, when she gets out, I will have options in terms of, like, I won't have to be the breadwinner necessarily. And so it's like, well, what do I want to do? Probably for the first time in my life, I thought about, because I'd worked since I was like 12, just had all kinds of jobs. It's like, for the first time, I was like, what if I could do anything? What do I want to do? And I decided, I was really into cyberpunk at the time. I was kind of behind the times, but I was really into cyberpunk. I thought, man, I want to be a writer. And so I wrote a bunch of stories and tried to sell them. Never could. And my friend that I mentioned that was from school that managed the comic shop. Now, at this point, I was working full time. I had a full time job doing art. This place I work at, still a place called MTM Recognition. They make awards, like trophies and stuff. We do like the Heisman Trophy. We do a bunch of bowl game trophies, a bunch of NASCAR trophies. It's a great company. I've worked there for over 30 years. But anyway, so
that's what you do currently?
That's what I do currently. Yeah, I got the job in February of '89. I think I just celebrated like 33 years there. Yeah, I'm
fascinating.
Yeah, I manage like a group of like 24 artists. I'm not. It's not my title, but I'm basically an art director there. Nice. I have a group of like sculptors and artists and machinists that all work under me. It's great. I'm so fortunate to work with talented people like every single day. It's amazing. Anyway, so I wrote this story and I thought, oh man, I should let my friend read this. And he read it and he goes, you know what? This will make a great comic book. And I thought, you know what? It probably would. And so I started drawing it, and that activated the gene in my head of like, oh my gosh, I can make comics. Unfortunately, this was about 1995, which I think the industry crashed in 93. I think in 96, Marvel declared bankruptcy. So it was like the absolute worst time. And so I knew I wasn't very good at it. And so I drew, I studied anatomy. I did stuff like that. And then in 99, through my wife's work, we had the opportunity to go to San Diego just on a visit, not during the con, but just on a visit. And so we went out there, and then when the con rolled around, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to San Diego Comic-Con. And so and it was a lot easier to get tickets back. And this was in 2000. I went to San Diego Comic-Con. And I took a portfolio. In fact, there's a website, or there's a blog called The Art of Scott Sackett that I have all of my old submissions that you can see, and I tell the stories about them because I went in 2000 and I kind of blew off, and it was depressing, but I dealt with it. And then I couldn't go in 2001. In 2002 I went, and I met. I went, and at the time, Marvel's booth consisted of like an 8-foot folding table. Literally, that's all they had for a booth, just in a row, just like anybody, like an artist would have or something.
Okay.
But I met a guy named CB Cebulski there, and CB gave me his card, and he said, stay in contact. I showed him my portfolio. He liked it. He said, stay in contact. At the time, I don't think he was even an associate editor yet. I think he was still working on, because Marvel in the early 2000s did a manga thing called Wave or something like that. And I think he was just working on that. But anyway, so that next spring, that was in 2002, in the spring of 2003, or that was summer of 2002, in the spring of 2003, through my wife's work, we had an opportunity to go to New York City. And so I, just on a whim, I reached out to CB and I said, hey, I'm going to New York. What are the odds I can get a tour of Marvel? And he goes, no problem. Call me when you get here. and so CB Cebulski gave me a tour of Marvel Comics. And on my webpage, I have some pictures that you could still take pictures there. I've actually been to Marvel twice, just as I'm in town. Can I swing by? So, in fact, Andy Schmidt was the guy that showed me around the second time. I met him through just submitting stuff. And he says, I don't know if it's true or not, but he thinks I was the last civilian or non-employee to get a tour of Marvel Comics. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, through that, I started working on a bunch of small stuff that never went anywhere. I had the worst luck. I got hired for, like I think it was in 2001. I got hired to do a book called Phase 7, I think, or Phase something, and they hired me, and I drew it all the way up to the last page, and there was some controversy. They didn't like a character design, and they said, well, we'll get back to you, and they never got back with me. And I was in Chicago years later, and I was looking at a guy's portfolio, and they had hired him to finish the book, and I go, wait a minute. In fact, he had used my pages as layouts and redrawn my pages for that book. I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't Phase 7. It had a number on it. So I did that. Do what?
But did you get paid?
No, I did. I don't believe I ever got paid for that. But it was a whopping sum of $20 a page.
Okay.
So, and I did, and then I would get, there was like all kinds of online stuff where you could go and apply, and I would like reach out. And I had people, like I did a book called Bigfoot Hunters, that the guy reached out to me. He's like, oh yeah, I got a deal with Dark Horse. I was like, okay, cool, I'll draw it. I drew the issue, and the people will, and I don't fault him necessarily, but when you're desperate, you'll grasp at any straw. And so if you have an editor that's interested, especially at a big company, then sometimes the deal that they do is like, yeah, okay, maybe. You're like, this is it. I'm gonna, and so I don't blame some of these people for being over enthusiastic. I got hired to do a book called what's the name of it? Jack something. Anyway, it's a superhero book that took place in New Orleans. I love that book, and I got paid for that. And I mean, again, I made $500 or $600 for the book. But the problem was none of this stuff was coming out. I got hooked up with a company called Greyhaven Comics they didn't pay, but they did anthologies, and I did a bunch of stuff for them, and all that stuff came out, but they would go to cons and sell it. It was never in the Diamond catalog or never in comic stores or anything like that. And so what happened was in 2017? Golly, it's 5 years ago. In 2017, I went to New York Comic Con, and when I went to a con, if anyone's trying to work in comics, you have to develop a thick skin. Like I would go to when I go to a convention and I'm showing my portfolio, I will go to every single booth there and say, do you hire artists, and are you looking at portfolios? And And sometimes, a lot of times at the conventions, it'll be the guy that you're talking to is the artist and maybe the writer, and they don't really do any other books. So, you get a lot of that. But usually people, I mean, if you're hygienic and slightly personable, people will respond to you. And generally, and certainly in the small press, people are generally pretty nice. So I went to every booth, and I went to this one booth, and I said, I'm an artist. I said, do you hire artists? Are you looking at portfolios? They said, hang on, you need to meet this guy. You need to talk to this guy. And it was Travis. And so Travis pulled me into the booth, kind of moved. I went over and we sat down. He was sat across from me. We talked. And I forget exactly what he said, but basically he said, "Tell me your story," which, I mean, you can tell I'm shy and reserved.
Right.
But basically I told him, I said, "Look, here's the deal. I get hired and the book doesn't get made." And I said, "I work or something happens or it doesn't get." And I said, "I get paid." I said, "But I don't care." I said, "I got a great day job. I don't need." Well, I mean, you always need $500, but I don't. That's
Right.
not what I'm doing this for. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm at this point, I'm doing it to get my book out. And he said, "Well, what you need to do is you need to find a writer that is at that. Like if I'm at this level, say in experience and quality, I need to find a writer that's about the same level, but maybe has more experience publishing or has a track record." And I said, "Well, is it okay if I talk to your writer?" Because they had writers there. Bob Sally was there. I forget who else was there. I remember Bob was there though, for sure. And I said, "Can I talk to your? Is it okay if I like pitch myself to your writer?" And he goes, "You know what?" He says, "I know I got the perfect guy." And I go, "Okay." And he goes, "His name is Greg Wright." And so he put me in contact with Greg. And when I got home, Greg wasn't at the con. When I got home, I called Greg, and Greg said, and here's what I love about Greg. Here's what I loved about Greg from instantly. I called him and he said, "Okay, let me give you some pitches." And I think he had a notebook or something, and he read me about a dozen pitches that he had ready to go. And one of them, and he read me all of them. And one of them was, it's like Charlie's Angels, but with real angels. And he kept telling me, I said, "Go back to that Charlie's Angels thing. Tell me about that." And so he told me a little bit about it. And he goes, "Well, ironically, that's the one that the first script is almost done." And I go, "Oh man." I go, "You know what?" I said, I think I want to work on that book. That's really cool, And I like the idea. That concept just grabbed me. I grew up in the 70s, and so I wasn't allowed to watch Charlie's Angels, but I got the concept of what he was saying. And for some reason, because I'm kind of goofy, and he talked about this, not me being goofy, but he talked about this in your interview with him. In my head, I was thinking like the TV show. And so I thought, okay, well, we're going to set it. I said, I'm going to draw it like it's in the 70s. I don't need to tell Greg. I just draw everything old. I'll draw old cars and old. Well, we did a bunch of fun. And finally I told him, I said, I think this book should take place in the 70s. And he goes, "You know what? That's a great idea." And so that has shaped, because the time he was working on issue 1, and that has really shaped the arc, because he bought it, because he then said, this is like for example, like issue 2 takes place at a shopping mall, because they go to a mall and they fight these supernatural menaces at the food court, and there's always this overarching arc of evil dwelling in the background, but then the girls are involved with stuff. I've been telling people, and I'm disappointed because Greg didn't say this. I'm trying to get Greg to use this as our tagline, but I tell people it's like Charlie's Angels meets Hellboy, but
Right.
but so issue 2 takes place in the mall. Issue 3, they go to a camp. They do like a summer camp, and it's kind of a spoof of those summer camp horror movies. And then the fourth issue, which I love drawing because I love to draw cars. The fourth issue was Cannonball Run, and basically the girls were involved in a cross-country race for their very freedom from evil, for their very soul. They had to race across country, and it was great. It was so much fun to draw, and I love Greg. Greg is, and I told Greg, and he mentioned this in his interview with you. early on, early on, I told Greg when we were talking, I said, I'm cool with this. I'm cool with the angels getting kicked out of heaven. I said, but Greg, I got to tell you, man, I'm a Christian. We got to be careful, And so he was like, oh, no. If we do anything, and we talked about some stuff that I would be uncomfortable working with, and he steered way clear of that. But the one thing that he had early on, and I was like, oh, I don't know, Greg, was he had a lot of profanity in it and stuff, and I'm like, is it just me or is it him? And so I didn't. And I didn't really. He's like, and he told me, no, trust me, it'll make sense. And then, and I think he told you this. I was watching the Suicide Squad, the second one, and I realized, oh my gosh, Greg is like James Gunn. He's got this absurdist sense of humor. So I've been telling people, if you love the Suicide Squad, if you loved Super, if you love the Guardians of the Galaxy, that's the water that Greg is drinking from when he writes these things. They've been so much fun to draw.
We're definitely going to pick up a copy.
Oh yeah.
As soon as it comes out, we're getting a copy.
I'm sorry.
I said as soon as it comes out, we're going to get a copy, or as soon as I can get the diamond code, I'm going to request a copy.
Awesome. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but it's very much, and it's it's kind of over the top violence. It's kind of, and it's like I said, it's if you like the Suicide Squad, I think you'll like Heaven's Rejects. It's been a great to draw. Greg's been great to work with. For sake of promoting the book, I was like, maybe I should come on and really rag Greg so it's like, oh, we got this feud and there's like dynamic energy there. I can't do that though. Greg's a great guy. He lives in Michigan. I live in Oklahoma, so we don't know each other, but he did a con in Tulsa a couple of years right before the pandemic, and I met him, and it was like we were like long lost brothers or whatever. So hopefully when the book comes out, we'll get to. I'm always telling him I want to go to a con, Greg, and I think the sad thing is with the pandemic. I think the pandemic really put things on hold for a lot of the cons and stuff. I know Greg told you he hadn't figured out his schedule yet, and but in fact, somebody asked me yesterday, "Are you going to do your Comic-Con?" I go, "I don't know. Are they going to have one? Who knows?"
I have to cut you off there, Scott. I appreciate. Okay. I love your energy. I appreciate the interview, and you did great. But we're going like.
Cody, I'm sorry I didn't let you talk.
No, it's fine. I appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Anytime you want to talk, holler at me. I'll be happy to talk to you. Next time I may let you talk some even. And like I said, if anybody is interested. They can check out my art at scottsackett.org. That's probably the easiest place. You can see some of my art there. There's a link there if they want to shoot me an email and tell me to, whatever, buzz off or whatever, Anyway, okay. I know I've ran over and our time is done. So.
Thank you, Scott.
Hey, thank you, Cody.
What? You mean you haven't subscribed to Comicchatauthority? Oh, come on. Subscribe already. What are you waiting for? It's no big deal. Like, man, don't forget to tell him to hit that like button. Yeah, that too. Just subscribe.